Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking on a challenge that sits at the very core of large-scale ground combat operations: protection.
That's right. And we're not just talking about, putting up barriers.
No, not at all. We're talking about the ultimate enabler, the set of coordinated actions that allows a massive ground combat force, like an entire corps, to maintain its fundamental freedom of action in a dynamic and, well, an intensely contested environment.
And that really gets to the heart of the question for today.
It does. The central question we're addressing is, how does a corps headquarters successfully coordinate all of its specialized capabilities to ensure it is consistently hard to detect and destroy, even when facing a sophisticated peer enemy who's determined to target every single critical node?
And that phrase, hard to detect and destroy, that's so central to modern doctrine. It really it encapsulates the whole mission of comprehensive military protection.
It really does. So for this deep dive, where are we pulling our information from?
We are pulling exclusively from authoritative doctrinal and training observation sources. So these are the documents that describe the systems and processes required at the core level. Specifically, we're drawing deep insights from the fundamental strategy document, Army Doctrine Publication 3.0, titled Operations.
The big one.
The big one. And its dedicated counterpart, Army Doctrine Publication 337, which is focused entirely on protection.
And we're not just sticking to doctrine. We're also integrating key insights from the fiscal year 25 Mission Command Training Program, Key Observations.
Which is so important.
It is, because it provides that critical real-world lens. It shows us precisely where major units are struggling in execution. And finally, we'll look ahead a bit at documents outlining the future vision, like the Army Futures Command Pamphlet 7127.
So our mission today is to really analyze the structures, the assessments, and most importantly, the specialized teams, what the doctrine calls the enablers, that are integrated across the entire corps.
And the goal of integrating all of that?
The goal is to make protection comprehensive, layered, and redundant. This is where the force moves beyond just, surviving.
Right. It's about actively maintaining the capacity to conduct sustained, decisive operations.
Exactly.
So let's jump right in by establishing that foundation.
Okay, let's unpack this core idea of the protection warfighting function. For someone listening who needs a concise understanding of this high-level concept, how should we define this function and really establish its importance?
Simply put, the protection warfighting function encompasses all the related tasks, systems, and methods used to prevent or mitigate detection, threat effects, and hazards. Its fundamental mission is threefold, and this is crucial.
Okay.
First, to preserve the force. Second, to deny the enemy freedom of action. And third, and maybe most importantly, to enable commanders to apply combat power.
So it's not a passive thing. Not at all. And this isn't just an Army function either. The Joint Publication 3.0 recognizes protection as one of the 7 joint functions common to all joint operations. It applies across the entire spectrum of competition, from day-to-day engagement all the way through large-scale armed conflict.
So protection isn't just a defensive shield. It's an active requirement to preserve your offensive capability. It's what allows you to fight without constantly looking over your shoulder worrying about being annihilated.
That's a perfect way to put it.
And that leads directly into its relationship with combat power. We often hear combat power defined by its 5 dynamics: leadership, firepower, information, mobility, and survivability. So where does protection fit into that dynamic?
Well, it enables all of them, but it is intrinsically and officially linked to the dynamic of survivability. According to Army Doctrine Publication 337, survivability is defined as both a primary task of the protection warfighting function and a core dynamic of combat power itself.
A dual identity.
Exactly. This dual identity makes it just foundational to the ability to fight.
That dual role must make it incredibly important. But what does the doctrine mean by survivability, practically speaking? Especially for, a large corps headquarters.
Survivability is the capability that permits forces to avoid or withstand hostile actions. And that could be kinetic attacks, information MX, even environmental conditions, while retaining the ability to fulfill their mission.
This is where those intentional active protection measures come into play.
It is. It includes supporting tasks that are both physical and cognitive.
Give us some examples. What are some of those physical and cognitive measures that the doctrine really emphasizes?
Physically, it involves things you'd expect, improving camouflage, cover, and concealment, and the basic structural steps like hardening command facilities and increasing personal protective posture.
Sure, the basics.
Right. But cognitively and technically, it includes the critical task of controlling electromagnetic emissions. This is a huge one.
I can imagine.
If a core headquarters is just pumping out predictable or strong radio signatures, it doesn't matter how robust your physical barriers are. The enemy can target it remotely and with precision.
And based on observations, that's a major sticking point.
It is. The failure to rigorously manage and minimize that informational and electromagnetic signature is, based on observations, one of the biggest failure points in modern large-scale combat operations.
Okay, so this is where the requirements become absolute. There are 4 mandated principles for protection efforts. A commander can't just do protection. It has to adhere to these 4 standards detailed in Army Doctrine Publication 337. Let's start with the first 2. Comprehensive and integrated.
Right. Comprehensive is all about scope. It means protection efforts must address all threats and all hazards across the entire operational environment.
So not just the shiny objects.
Exactly. The staff cannot narrowly focus just on peer enemy missiles. They have to simultaneously consider deep strikes, local criminal activities, potential insider threats, cyber attacks, even non-hostile issues like severe weather or chemical spills.
So if you overlook any potential hazard, your protection plan just fails to meet that doctrinal standard.
You've got a critical vulnerability. That's right.
And what about integrated? That addresses the timing and synchronization. It's about making sure protection isn't an afterthought, something you draft at the end of the operations order.
Precisely. Protection has to be interwoven into the operations process and every other warfighting function. The protection cell must be synchronized with the targeting process, the command and control network design, the maneuver plan, all of it.
Because if it's not integrated, you could end up with protection measures that actually conflict with what you're trying to do.
You could end up with self-inflicted wounds. For example, a hardening measure might limit a unit's mobility, or an electromagnetic protection plan might inadvertently interfere with a key reconnaissance platform. Integration prevents that.
The third principle is layered. I think most people intuitively get this as having multiple defenses, but the doctrine seems to emphasize a specific structure.
It does. Layering means using multiple mutually supporting defensive systems and measures to achieve depth. Think of it like a set of concentric rings around a critical asset.
Okay.
You might have a long-range air defense system, then closer-range, short-range air defense, and then local security forces on the ground. If the long-range system misses, the short-range system still has a chance. A layered defense ensures that if one mechanism fails to stop the threat, another one immediately steps in.
That makes sense because modern threats are rarely coming from just one direction or using one method.
Almost never.
Okay, let me challenge that a bit because to the average listener, layered and the final principle, redundant, they can sound like the exact same thing, just having more defenses. If layering is using different types of defense missiles, electronic warfare, camouflage, how does redundancy provide a unique protective value?
That is a fantastic distinction to draw out, and the doctrine is very specific here. Layering is about depth and mutual support, using different systems to defeat a threat. Redundancy is about ensuring that critical capabilities, areas, and information have secondary or auxiliary protection measures that can perform the same function if the primary system is compromised.
The same function.
Oh.
Can you give us a concrete example of that critical difference?
Certainly. Let's say your command post relies on a high-bandwidth satellite terminal for its primary communication link. That's System A. A redundant system would be a dedicated, separate communication channel, maybe a troposcatter link or high-frequency radio, ready to take over that critical function instantly.
So they do the exact same job, but through different means.
Exactly. They serve the identical purpose, maintaining command and control, but they use entirely separate infrastructure. The primary risk of skipping redundancy is total vulnerability if a single point of failure is targeted.
And Army Doctrine Publication 337 warns that commanders might not be able to achieve full redundancy. What risk are they accepting when that happens?
Redundancy is a huge drain on scarce resources, personnel, equipment, logistics. The doctrine explicitly acknowledges that you may not be able to achieve full redundancy for all protection priorities because of those constraints.
Which forces the commander's hand.
It forces the commander and the staff to actively accept what's called residual risk for non-priority assets. They're essentially trading perfect security for maximum operational efficiency and combat power concentration. And that prioritization is what directly impacts the next critical step, the planning mechanisms. So moving from these foundational principles, we have to look at the actual planning mechanisms at the core level. A core is a massive entity, and managing protection for it requires a dedicated staff structure. And that all starts with the protection cell.
The protection cell, it's like the nerve center for this function, advising the commander. What specifically are their primary responsibilities during planning?
The protection cell is responsible for advising the commander on risks, helping visualize the protection requirements, prioritizing mitigating strategies, and coordinating all protection efforts across the entire staff. They're the specialists ensuring the protection scheme supports the commander's intent.
They translate those four principles into actual actionable tasks.
That's right. They maintain situational awareness of current protection levels and future vulnerabilities.
But the protection cell is only a handful of people. They can't operate in a vacuum. Protection requires input from every staff section, which is where I assume the Protection Working Group comes in.
Absolutely. The Protection Working Group is the essential cross-functional organization that ensures integration. It's a formal meeting that brings together representatives from every warfighting function and specialized staff section.
So we're talking about signal, public affairs, safety.
All of them. Force health protection, legal experts. This group is where the real synchronization happens, just as it's outlined in Army Doctrine Publication 337.
What's fascinating to me about the Protection Working Group is that it incorporates elements we don't always associate with force protection. For example, why is public affairs critical to that working group?
Because modern conflict is fought in the information environment. The public affairs representative brings awareness of narratives and potential misinformation campaigns. Enemy attempts to create confusion, undermine local support, or even guide their targeting decisions by spreading false information about our troop locations.
So protecting the information environment is integral to operational security.
And the public affairs officer is the staff's expert on managing that informational hazard. Without that cross-functional collaboration, key vulnerabilities like cyberspace security or misinformation defense might get completely missed.
This group's primary output during planning relies on a systematic process the doctrine calls the triad of protection assessments. This is to ensure nothing is missed. So let's start with the first one, threat and hazard assessment.
This is the starting point. This assessment determines the likelihood and the nature of hostile actions and non-hostile activities. And hostile actions are broad.
So not just the enemy force.
Not at all. It includes sophisticated peer enemies and terrorists, but also insider threats, criminal activities, and local armed groups. And the non-hostile activities cover things like severe weather, environmental contamination, or even traffic accidents that could degrade the force's ability to operate.
So you have to understand the probabilities of all these things, their location and their potential severity. That's the foundation for figuring out what you need to protect against.
Exactly.
Once you understand the threats, you need to determine what you absolutely cannot afford to lose. And that's the criticality assessment.
This is the second crucial leg of the triad. The criticality assessment identifies the key assets and infrastructure that are truly essential for mission success. And the staff can't just list everything they own. They have to be rigorous.
What's the metric then? How do they determine criticality?
Crucially, the asset's criticality is determined by the impact of its temporary or permanent loss on the unit's ability to conduct its mission. This requires staff sections to really gauge how quickly a lost capability, say a specific satellite communications gateway or critical fuel hub, can be replaced or bypassed.
And the doctrine notes that for echelons above corps, like this headquarters, the assessment has to extend beyond just their own military assets.
Absolutely. For large organizations operating in complex theaters, the assessment must specifically include major urban population centers, key civilian infrastructure like power grids, water supply, transportation hubs, all of it.
Because the loss of those civilian assets can have severe political and humanitarian impacts that directly restrict the Corps' freedom of action.
And that makes them critical protection priorities.
Yeah, you have the threats, the bad guys, and the hazards. You have your indispensable gear and infrastructure, the criticality. The final step is the vulnerability assessment.
The vulnerability assessment ties the first two together. It examines the susceptibility of those critical assets to the identified threats and hazards. This is where the intelligence section and the protection cell truly have to collaborate.
They're finding the weak spots.
They're identifying specific weaknesses that the enemy could exploit. For example, if the criticality assessment identifies the core main command post and the threat assessment identifies enemy cruise missile capability, the vulnerability assessment would look at the physical hardening, the air defense coverage, and the electromagnetic signature of that command post to find specific gaps. That gap then drives the mitigating actions.
And this whole systematic process, this triad, culminates in the foundational document that drives resource allocation for the entire Corps.
Yeah.
The Protection Priority List, or PPL.
Yes. The protection priority list is how the commander translates all that assessment into immediate actionable tasks. It organizes critical assets and activities based directly on the commander's intent and priorities. This list ensures that the available protection assets, which are always scarce, whether they're air defense artillery battalions, explosive ordnance disposal teams, or counterintelligence units, are aligned precisely to the most essential mission requirements. This list is the contract between the commander and the staff about what risk they're willing to accept.
And this prioritization mechanism connects directly back to that core concept of the main effort found in Army Doctrine Publication 3.0.
Exactly. The commander establishes clear priorities of support. The unit or activity designated as the main effort, the one whose success is paramount to the entire operation, must receive priority of support and resources.
And since protection is a key component of combat power,
If your main effort is a deep penetration maneuver, then that maneuvering force, its lines of communication, and its forward sustainment nodes have to get the lion's share of protection priority, often at the expense of supporting or rear area efforts.
and this is where we bring in that critical real-world friction, straight from the Mission Command Training Program Key Observations. The observations consistently point out that units struggle immensely with this prioritization. It leads to what they call the pervasive allocation problem.
This is a persistent organizational challenge that risks the success of the entire operation. The observation noted that corps and divisions often default to spreading combat power and protection resources evenly across subordinate units.
Peanut butter spreading.
It's exactly that. Instead of ruthlessly concentrating those resources at the decisive point identified by the protection priority list, they spread it thin.
What are the concrete consequences of that? Of failing to allocate protection resources strictly according to the commander's priority.
It immediately undermines your ability to achieve favorable force ratios at the critical time and place. Instead of prioritizing a full air defense umbrella or robust counterintelligence for the main effort's critical infrastructure, those resources are diluted across the entire area of operations.
And that exposes the decisive operation to unnecessary attrition and risks mission failure.
All because the staff failed to execute the commander's stated priorities. It shows the principle is sound, but the execution of ruthless prioritization remains a huge struggle in large-scale combat.
That discussion sets up the challenge perfectly. If the Corps headquarters is prioritizing correctly, it then has to effectively leverage this vast array of specialized capabilities spread throughout the other warfighting functions. Protection isn't a single element, it's an outcome of coordinating everything. Let's start with the fire's warfighting function, which provides a huge layer of protection.
It really does. Fires contributes directly through what the joint community calls active air and missile defense. Joint Publication 301 defines this as the direct defensive actions taken to destroy, nullify, or reduce the effectiveness of hostile air and ballistic missile threats against friendly forces and assets.
So this is the kinetic dimension of protection.
Yeah.
Physically intercepting and defeating airborne threats.
That's one.
And when these systems are all aggregated, they form the integrated air defense system, providing that layered defense we spoke about earlier.
That's correct. The Integrated Air Defense System is the organized collection of component air defense systems. So we're talking about the combined use of aircraft, surface-to-air missiles, dedicated anti-aircraft artillery, and crucially, electronic warfare systems.
All working together.
All working together. This system is designed to provide depth, ensuring that if a sophisticated peer enemy launches a complex attack, maybe a mix of cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and fighters, there are multiple opportunities and methods to engage and defeat that threat before it reaches a critical asset.
One of the biggest shifts in the contemporary threat landscape is the prevalence of small, affordable, and just incredibly pervasive unmanned aircraft systems. How does the fire's function adapt to address countering those systems?
Countering unmanned aircraft systems requires a specific and highly layered approach because these systems are fundamentally different from traditional aircraft. The Joint Doctrine notes the necessity to mitigate these small, low-signature threats.
And you have to consider two primary risks, right? Observation and actual weaponized effects.
Exactly. First, their use for observation and targeting, and second, their potential for weaponized effects. And they threaten the entire depth of the operational area, which includes the Corps' rear support areas and command posts.
And these systems are constantly evolving. Some are autonomous, some use simple GPS. So what specific planning considerations are required to deal with them effectively?
Planners have to account for the specific characteristics of the unmanned aircraft system. Is it fixed wing or rotary wing? What are its control methods, line of sight, beyond line of sight, or semi-autonomous flight paths? And how might it be defeated without causing undue collateral damage?
And the countermeasures are just as diverse.
They have to be. They include traditional kinetic systems, specialized high-powered microwave or directed energy weapons, and various forms of jamming that target the electromagnetic control links. The key, as emphasized in Joint Publication 301, is integrating these diverse capabilities. No single solution works against every type of unmanned aircraft system threat.
Okay, let's shift to the movement and maneuver warfighting function. Here, protection is achieved through positioning and maintaining security. Security operations seem just foundational to core protection.
They truly are. Security operations are performed to provide early and accurate warning of enemy operations. By pushing reconnaissance and security forces out, the protected force gains time and maneuver space to react.
Which significantly reduces the uncertainty for the commander.
That's it. Army Doctrine Publication 337 highlights that protection through security is essentially about buying time and clarity in a complex battle space.
And specifically, we need to address area security, which protects those vital lines of communication and sustainment hubs in the rear area.
Area security is typically designated as an economy of force mission. Its purpose is protecting critical lines of communication, convoys, and fixed sites like logistical hubs or airfields.
And it relies heavily on local security measures, doesn't it? It's not just one unit's job.
That's a key point. It's implemented by all units operating in that area, regardless of their primary mission, and then it's reinforced by dedicated area security operations. Because if the rear area breaks down, the forward maneuver elements run out of fuel, ammunition, and command capacity very quickly.
Engineers, who we traditionally associate with mobility and bridging, also play a huge protection role through the capability called countermobility.
That is a critical linkage that is often overlooked. Countermobility, which involves combined arms activities that use or enhance the effects of obstacles, is all about preventing the enemy from gaining a position of advantage against our forces.
So it's proactive protection through denial of access.
Exactly. By shaping the terrain, laying obstacles, creating specific choke points, or destroying key bridges, engineers directly protect critical friendly capabilities by restricting the enemy's freedom of movement and forcing them into pre-planned engagement areas.
And we can't overlook the highly specialized capability of explosive ordnance disposal support. Their role extends far beyond just responding to bomb threats.
That's right. Explosive ordnance disposal capability is absolutely crucial for enabling freedom of action. Their teams deal with the full spectrum of explosive hazards mines, improvised explosive devices, unexploded ordnance, all of which limit maneuver and endanger personnel.
And they have a very specific high-end specialty as well.
They do. Their capability is critical for protecting military and civilian personnel and infrastructure, but their specialty also extends to handling chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear munitions. They act as a crucial expert layer of defense against these catastrophic weapons.
Okay, now we move to the non-physical domains, which any sophisticated peer threat is going to target immediately. How do intelligence and information enablers protect the core headquarters and its forces?
They protect the information environment itself, and this really starts with operations security.
OPSC.
Right. It's a mandatory process that identifies and controls critical information and indicators of friendly force actions. The goal is to protect what we call essential elements of friendly information, those pieces of data or those patterns the enemy could exploit to determine our disposition or intentions.
How does operation security differ from just, say, protecting classified information?
That's a great question. Traditional security protects classified data. Operations security protects indicators that can be derived from unclassified or even public sources. It's about protecting the pattern of life.
The little things that add up.
The timing, frequency, and signatures of movement, communications, activities that, when pieced together by enemy intelligence, reveal critical information. If the core headquarters consistently holds its planning meeting at the same time and uses the same frequency hop, that pattern becomes a vulnerability that operations security has to address.
And closely tied to this is cyberspace and electromagnetic protection. This is where the enemy can achieve decisive effects without ever firing a kinetic round.
And that seems like the most challenging domain to defend against.
It is, because protection efforts here involve measures to protect personnel, facilities, and equipment from the negative effects of friendly or enemy use of the electromagnetic spectrum. These things could degrade or destroy our combat capability.
And the Army Futures Command Vision specifically highlights this reliance on resilient networks and the need to protect the electromagnetic spectrum, as adversaries will target these capabilities from strategic distances.
So this protection is a continuous, active effort to ensure our command and control remains viable against a sophisticated electronic attack.
That has to be.
Beyond protecting our networks, intelligence enablers are also working to unmask the enemy, who might be hiding within the local populace or integrated into the infrastructure. Two key capabilities here are identity intelligence and counterintelligence.
Identity intelligence, detailed in Joint Publication 310, is an absolutely crucial capability in complex operations. It combines the synchronized application of biometrics, forensics, and document and media exploitation with intelligence and identity management processes.
So the core goal is to establish identity and affiliations, denying anonymity to the adversary.
Exactly. Whether they are enemy agents, terrorists, or personnel supporting illicit activities, it turns a faceless threat into an identifiable target.
And then there's the human element, counterintelligence.
Counterintelligence teams are essential for detecting, identifying, and characterizing the adversary, the resident populations, and specific institutions. They work to reduce the threat's ability to recognize friendly disposition and intentions.
And the Army Futures Command Vision emphasizes this capability as key to defeating enemy intelligence efforts.
Especially in the support areas, where adversary agents will try to collect targeting information on headquarters and fixed sites. Counterintelligence is the active, human-centered defense against enemy espionage.
Protection has to be sustained over the long haul to achieve victory in large-scale combat. Let's talk about that essential relationship between protection and our ability to simply keep fighting, starting with the doctrine's concept of the tether of operational reach.
Operational reach is defined as the distance and duration across which a force can successfully employ military capabilities. Army Doctrine Publication 3I calls it a tether. It literally limits how far and how long you can fight.
And it's a direct function of a whole host of things.
It is. It's a function of intelligence, protection, sustainment, endurance, and combat power relative to the enemy. If your protection fails, if your lines of communication are constantly interdicted or your command nodes are retreated, your operational reach shortens dramatically.
Because you can no longer safely extend your forces or your lines of supply.
You're tied to your last secure point.
And if a corps exceeds that reach, it risks culmination, the point where it can no longer generate combat power.
Precisely. Prolonged combat against a peer enemy has the potential to exhaust sustainment reserves within the theater, thereby restricting the Joint Force Commander's freedom of action and operational reach.
This means the Corps has to constantly be planning for reconstitution operations.
All the time. Recognizing that losses, damage, and resource consumption will require significant effort just to rebuild combat power and continue the fight. Protection is the key factor in minimizing those losses and extending that reach.
Protection of these sustainment efforts often focuses heavily on the joint security area and rear operations.
Yes, the joint security area is a specific physical area designated by the Joint Force Commander to facilitate the protection of joint bases and their connecting lines of communication that support joint operations.
And protection in the rear often relies on local security measures, which are then reinforced by dedicated area security operations.
And as we noted earlier, this is an economy of force mission focused explicitly on ensuring the continued conduct of sustainment operations that are generating and maintaining combat power. If the rear area is not secure, if logistics convoys can't move or fuel storage sites are targeted, the entire operation will collapse very, very quickly.
This brings us to a crucial operational insight from the Mission Command Training Program, key observations regarding the function of the rear command post. This speaks directly to how high-level synchronization impacts endurance. What did the observation reveal about staff structures?
This is one of the most important procedural takeaways for Corps and division staffs. The observation showed that units that maintain their future operations sustainment planning elements only in the supporting sustainment command or division sustainment brigade.
So not physically with the main command group.
Right, not physically integrated with the rear command post. Those units consistently struggled to synchronize rear operations within the critical 48 to 72-hour planning window.
And 48 to 72 hours is the standard planning horizon for future operations. Why does that gap in physical integration matter so much during that critical time frame?
Because it creates a debilitating synchronization gap at the exact moment the staff is developing the next phase of the operation. Without the physical presence of the sustainment planner in the rear command post-battle rhythm, the planning guidance, the priority of effort, and the consistent feedback from senior sustainment leadership just weren't being regularly integrated.
So they were working on parallel tracks.
Essentially, this meant the logistics plan supporting the main effort fuel dumps, munition deliveries, medical evacuation routes were often a half step behind or were based on outdated operational assumptions.
So the recommended things here is procedural, not material. It's about where you put people.
Precisely. The recommendation, based on these operational observations, is that deliberately integrating the sustainment planner into the rear command post-battle rhythm is necessary for success. It provides regular, direct touch points for planning guidance and ensures the logistics priorities align instantly with the main effort.
A low-cost, high-impact fix for a major organizational problem.
A huge one that directly impacts the endurance and protection of the entire force.
Finally, in this section, we need to address the most critical asset, the soldier and the force health protection function.
Force health protection promotes, improves, or conserves the behavioral and physical well-being of soldiers. And this is far more than just battlefield trauma care. It's fundamentally preventative and restorative.
So it's about keeping the force fit to fight.
It is. Force health protection measures enable a fit force and protect against a whole host of health hazards. This includes managing environmental threats, ensuring sanitation, and protecting against exposure to chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear hazards.
And it also includes managing the invisible wounds of conflict.
Absolutely. A critical and increasingly recognized part of force health protection is combat and operational stress control, managing the long-term psychological impact of sustained, high-intensity conflict. A corps cannot maintain endurance if its personnel are treated by illness, fatigue, stress, or unseen hazards.
Protecting the health and behavioral well-being of the force is as vital to combat power as protecting the communications network.
Every bit as vital.
We've established the foundation, the mechanisms, and the enablers, but future conflict demands evolution. The doctrine is clearly pushing protection beyond traditional static measures like hardening facilities. So what is the imperative for dynamic protection?
The future doctrine, particularly from the Army Futures Command vision, mandates that protection must be dynamic, anticipatory, and proactive. The reliance on passive measures alone, building walls and fences, is completely insufficient against sophisticated peer threats capable of deep precision strike and multi-domain attack.
So it's about denying the enemy freedom of action. That's the active cognitive approach to protection.
It is. This expands the preservation of critical capabilities, assets, and activities throughout all domains, not just physical security, but cyber, space, and the electromagnetic spectrum.
So if the Corps waits for the enemy to show up, they have already ceded the initiative in the protection fight.
Exactly. Protection is now, in many respects, an offensive task of detection and preemption. We have to strive to disrupt enemy targeting by continuously sensing, identifying, and analyzing data automatically, anticipating their moves, and proactively protecting, hardening, or moving our assets before they can be successfully targeted.
Let's return to those reality checks from the Mission Command Training Program key observations. They highlight two major persistent problems in execution that undermine this idea of dynamic protection. The first, the allocation problem, we've discussed, but it bears repeating in this context.
It does, because the observations show this behavior is pervasive and deeply ingrained. Units consistently fail to allocate combat power effectively toward the main effort. They spread resources evenly, driven by an institutional fear of leaving any subordinate unit unprotected.
This organizational default toward egalitarian resource distribution risks the entire operation.
It does, because it undermines the ability to achieve favorable force ratios at the decisive point. If you protect everything equally, you protect nothing adequately. Dynamic protection requires the courage to prioritize and concentrate resources.
The second challenge they point out is the assessment problem. How does a staff's inability to link their assessments directly to command decisions impact the Corps' ability to adapt dynamically?
The observation highlights a major weakness in the staff process. Units struggle to frame what they're assessing and link that analysis directly to actionable decisions. In the Protection Working Group specifically, units often fail to refine their outputs so they directly inform the approval or validation of risk decisions.
So the staff produces a thick report on vulnerabilities, but not a clear decision brief for the commander.
That's a great way to put it.
What's the consequence of having excellent data but a poor link to the decision?
Well, if the vulnerability assessment shows a severe susceptibility to an enemy capability,
Yeah.
say a specific communications node is highly susceptible to electromagnetic jamming, but the staff output doesn't clearly state the necessary compensating measure, the cost of that measure, and the residual risk if that measure isn't taken.
The commander is left without what they need to make an informed decision on whether to accept or mitigate that risk.
Exactly. The assessment process has to be tightly linked to the decision cycle. Otherwise, dynamic protection just stalls, and the force reverts to passive defense.
Looking ahead, the future vision anticipates technology solving many of these cognitive burdens and decision delays. What role will artificial intelligence and data science play in accelerating protection planning and execution?
The Army Futures Command Vision is explicit on this. Artificial intelligence and data science will significantly reduce the cognitive demands on staffs. These tools will enable faster protection planning and execution by analyzing vast amounts of sensor data and intelligence automatically.
So AI can process streams of data on enemy movement, our own signatures, infrastructure vulnerability, much faster than any human team.
And that allows staffs to synchronize and prioritize protective efforts in near real time. The goal is to see ourselves through the enemy's eyes and identify our own vulnerabilities instantaneously, achieving that anticipatory protection we talked about.
And finally, let's discuss convergence, the combined application of effects across all domains, the real core of future operations. How dependent is convergence on a flawless protection scheme?
Convergence demands a highly resilient protection scheme because it requires simultaneously applying capabilities across land, air, and sea domains, in cyberspace, the information environment, and the electromagnetic spectrum, to achieve that synchronization.
You need a network that just works.
You need a redundant, secure, resilient, and crucially, a self-healing communications network connectivity capability.
A self-healing network sounds a bit like science fiction, but really speaks to the necessary level of network protection, doesn't it?
It speaks to the recognition that the network will be attacked and it will be degraded. This network has to be enhanced by robust edge computing and AI capabilities at the platform level. If that network, the lifeblood of convergence, carrying all the targeting data and command signals, is not protected and capable of automatically recovering from enemy attacks, the entire concept of synchronized multi-domain attack collapses.
So protection is the absolute prerequisite for convergence to succeed.
It's the table stakes. Our deep dive today reinforces one central concept. Core protection is fundamentally a cognitive and command challenge, far more than just a material or tactical one.
It's a thinking game.
It is. It requires the staff to use the intelligence and assessment processes, that triad of assessments, to accurately anticipate the threat, and then apply the operational art of ruthlessly prioritizing scarce resources, fires, engineers, security forces, to protect the main effort.
And only through that intense integrated synchronization, which is formalized in the protection priority list, can a core ensure the endurance and freedom of action it needs to prevail against a sophisticated peer enemy.
That's the whole game.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, planning future operations? The protection warfighting function isn't a defensive afterthought, relegated to the back of the operations order. It is the sum of all specialized capabilities, the enablers integrated across the entire operational framework.
From the engineers' counter-mobility efforts and the signal officers' electromagnetic protection plans,
to that crucial procedural fix of integrating the sustainment planner into the rear command post. All these elements must converge to enable maneuver, maintain endurance, and ensure the core can win.
well said.
Which leads us with a final thought to mull over. In a future where adversaries seek to win by targeting communications and critical infrastructure from strategic distances, is the single greatest threat to core operations no longer a physical force, but the undetected degradation of the electromagnetic spectrum and the flow of information. Something to think about as you integrate this deep dive into your next big decision.
Indeed. It all comes back to that resilient, protected network and the disciplined prioritization of scarce resources.
Thank you for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.